What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. Today, we've got a solo podcast today, just me. We're going to go over why you should do hybrid training, what hybrid training is, why it's important, who it's for, who it's not for, and overall, all the benefits of combining strength and endurance training as hybrid training. So if you've been curious why hybrid training, if you've been looking into it, or maybe you found my free guide and this is your first intro to hybrid training, this is going to be a great place to start. I might even title this Start Here podcast in the future and link it. That way people can see why hybrid training. So if you've come here from maybe one of those links in the future, email, newsletter, or anything else, welcome. Welcome to Assemble Performance. Welcome to the podcast. I am excited to get into this today. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got a new kind of setup here. If you're on my Instagram stories, you probably saw I took a picture today of my setup here. So my kind of camera setup. So if you're watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments below if you like it, if you liked the previous setup I had, or any other thoughts about that. Always trying to make this better for you. If you're listening on audio, no real changes for you. I'll just try to keep the visuals to a minimum. In the past, I've done some visuals and then had to explain them. But anyways, going to get into the podcast. Got some notes here to go over, and we're going to get into it. So firstly, the big question is, what is hybrid training? If you're new here, you might not know what it is. You might have seen it on YouTube, on Instagram, but you're not quite sure what it is. You just see these people lifting and running, right? So hybrid training is actually not a super scientific term. The scientific term is called concurrent training. I should have pulled the definition. I don't have it, but concurrent training is just training strength and endurance quality at the same time or concurrently. That could even look like a runner who strength trains to help their running, something like that, right? Hybrid training was a term coined in 2015 by Alex Viada in his book, The Hybrid Athlete, which is a solid book. Check it out. I think he's writing the second one too, actually. But hybrid training roughly means to train strength and endurance at the same time that don't necessarily support each other. So for a runner who's strength training to support his running, the strength work is going to look a lot different than a runner who's training for a powerlifting meet, for a bodybuilding show, or just to push his PR in whatever lift he or she wants to do. So that in that way, the strength training doesn't necessarily complement the endurance training. It's actually separate. There is some carryover complement between both of them, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But the pursuit of strength is not necessarily only to support running, and vice versa. The pursuit of an endurance sport is not to support the strength. It is just a secondary goal, right? So hybrid training is a pretty broad term. It's not scientific, so I'm not going to gatekeep the term hybrid training. That's the official definition of hybrid training. I kind of consider hybrid training to just be any kind of concurrent training for two goals, whether they support each other or not. So I have runners who also just want to be as strong as possible, but along the way want that strength training to enhance their running as much as possible. So it's kind of a blurred line between that concurrent and hybrid training. At the end of the day, it's all concurrent training. It's all training two disciplines, and I don't only work with people who are trying to push strength and endurance in separate goals in quote-unquote hybrid training. I also work with concurrent athletes who are really big into one sport, and they want to, everything to kind of supplement and support that sport. Apologies there. Everything to support that sport. One example is I have some Spartan athletes who are big into Spartan races, obstacle course races, and so they're pushing strength and endurance training, but they're doing it all for this goal of doing better at Spartan races, doing Spartan trifecta, PRing, whatever they want to do there, right? So technically, I don't think that would be considered hybrid training. That would just be like concurrently training for obstacle course races, but it's all under the same umbrella. We're not going to gatekeep that. But if you're used to a single sport, right, a bodybuilding, powerlifting, endurance sports, and you've never done any other lift, I don't want you to be like, oh my gosh, do I want to concurrent train or hybrid train? You're just getting caught up in semantics there, and semantics is not something I want to spend a lot of time on right now because it doesn't really matter in this context. Sometimes it does definitely matter, but in this context, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to get into why you should hybrid train or concurrent train. You can fill in the blanks there however you want your life to look. I'm going to use the term hybrid training because that's the best way that people understand it, and the way a lot of new people are getting introduced to it. All right, so if you're new here, if you've been here for a while and you're not quite sure if you should take up hybrid training, maybe you're still training in a single sport, I'm going to get into the benefits of hybrid training, why I like to hybrid train, why a lot of people like to hybrid train, and we're going to start with the health benefits actually, because there's a vast number of health benefits, and then we're going to get into the non-health benefits, whether it's performance or life enhancement, so on and so forth. So health benefits, we're actually going to break this up into strength training, endurance training, and hybrid training. So for strength training, if you're an endurance athlete, you never strength trained, some of this might be new. For endurance training, if you're a strength athlete, you've never endurance trained, this might be new. And then we'll bring it all together as to the health benefits of doing them both at the same time. So for strength training, when you take on a strength program, you're looking at a few different adaptations you're going to make to your health. You're going to increase your strength, clearly. You're going to increase your lean muscle mass, and you're going to have some neuromuscular adaptation, that brain-body connection, right? The ability of your brain to innervate the motor neurons in your muscles and make you stronger. So from a health perspective, increased strength is going to make your daily life activities a lot easier. Getting groceries, climbing stairs, carrying your kids, et cetera, et cetera. And overall, it's going to help you feel like your best self day to day. I had a friend of my wife's that started lifting with her, and I do program for my wife. It's really easy. She has really simple goals, so I program for her. And this friend mentioned she was picking something up a month later, and she was like, oh my gosh, that was so much easier than it used to be. And, it's one of those things that me as a coach, I understand. When you start strength training, you're going to have a easier rest of your life. But a lot of people don't really think about that until it happens to them. So increased strength is going to make those daily tasks feel easier. And as we age, sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass, mostly due to age. I'm not sure if the official definition is due to age, but we see it a lot due to aging. Sarcopenia is something we absolutely want to prevent if we want to be our healthiest and most active selves, because as we age, our ability to keep lean muscle mass dwindles, and then we lose our ability to, run around with our kids, to go upstairs, to prevent falls, things like that. So strength training is going to help you as you age, just kind of be a badass old person that's able to do as much as possible, go on vacations, hike with your kids, grandkids, all those things. And then with age, we also start to lose our fine motor control. So, as old people kind of shaky, have a hard time, being very precise with their movements. And strength training can help us keep that mind muscle, that neuromuscular connection strong, especially if you do things that are going to specifically help you with your fine motor control, some lifts that are going to help you specifically with fine motor control. All lifts really will, because you've got that mind muscle connection, but something with a dumbbell that's unstable might be a little better at that than something with a barbell. Don't extrapolate that to mean something it doesn't. It's all good. Just kind of very nitpicking there as far as giving you an example. And then as far as strength training goes for your health, we also have metabolic changes. So as you increase your lean muscle mass, of note, this doesn't mean that you're going to be bulky like a bodybuilder. Most bodybuilders you see take a lot of steroids. If you want to see a more realistic example of what somebody who dedicates their entire life to training looks like, or their entire life to training to gain muscle without steroids looks like, look at natural bodybuilders. They look amazing, but they are much less insane than most of the bodybuilders you're used to seeing. So increased muscle mass is not bad for those of you that are like, I don't want to be bulky. People dedicate years of their lives without steroids to getting big, and a lot of them don't look bulky. They look pretty lean or toned, like people might say. It's the steroids on top of the work, on top of the genetics that makes, Chris Bumstead look the way Chris Bumstead looks. Not that he looks bad, he doesn't look bad at all, but some people see that and get afraid. But increased muscle mass metabolically is going to increase your resting metabolic rate, which is how many calories you burn at rest. And that's because muscle tissue requires more energy to maintain than fat tissue. And that's just going to help you with your overall metabolism, your overall health, because you're going to burn more calories at rest. So then it becomes harder to put on fat later in life, because at rest you're burning more calories than somebody who has less muscle mass. So you can eat a little more and keep a favorable body composition. And strength training has also been shown to improve insulin sensitivity, which can help prevent type 2 diabetes. Not like it's a foolproof thing, right? There's a lot of factors that go into that, and I'm by no means a medical professional. But having that increased muscle mass, having that increased basal metabolic rate, having that improved insulin sensitivity is going to do wonders for your health hormonally and metabolically. We'll get to hormones in a minute, but increased muscle mass is just kind of a cheat code to life. As another coach I know and physical therapist, Katie Dabrowski, I had her on the podcast earlier this year. She says lean muscle mass is a cheat code to life because it makes you stronger, it makes everything easier, it makes you healthier. There's very little, if no, negative side effect from increased lean muscle mass. And you're not going to get bulky on accident. It's a very purposeful thing. Years of training to get quote unquote bulky. Lean muscle mass does not mean you're bulky. But anyways, skeletal changes from strength training. There's a thing called Wolff's Law, which is, in quotes, natural healthy bones will adapt and change to adapt to the stress that it is subjected to. What that means is just as you stress your body, your bones are going to get stronger. Our bodies are not machines. Machines, as you work them, they break down. Our bodies, as you work them and give them sufficient rest, they get stronger. And so Wolff's Law states that as you stress the bones get stronger. And you can see this in cross-section MRIs of athletes versus non-athletes. through adolescence, through college, through adulthood. Their bones can be denser in certain areas depending on the sport and the direction of the sport. And that's going to really help us as we age, prevent fractures and protect against falls. And then it's also going to help us prevent against the disease of osteoporosis as we age, which is the disease of age, or I think it's just disease in general, but mostly it's seen in aging, where your bone mass decreases and that increases the risk of fracture. So combine the lean muscle mass, the strength, with the stronger bones as well and connective tissue from strength training, and you really prevent the risk of falls, especially in old age. You see people fall and break their hip, fall and break their femur, fall down the stairs. Those are life-altering things. Sometimes people die from that depending on how old you are, depending on where you're at in your life and everything, depending on what you break. And so strength training throughout your life can help prevent that because it helps you have the strength to walk up the stairs, have the strength and the agility to catch yourself when you trip off a curb, and have the increased bone mass to prevent fractures if and when you do fall. And literally, people don't think about this, but that can save your life. And I have a podcast coming up, actually, with somebody who didn't fall, but where fitness saved their lives. So if you're interested, definitely subscribe, and you'll get a notification when that comes up. It should be a few podcasts from now. We're sitting down and getting the schedule figured out right now. But that one will probably be titled How Fitness Saved His Life. So be on the lookout for that. And then strength training hormonally, hormone changes. There are short-term increases in anabolic hormones after strength training that's going to support muscle growth and tissue repair. And then most of the long-term hormonal changes from strength training are just the long-term hormonal changes from having increased lean muscle mass and being healthier in general. But there are those short-term increases in the anabolic hormones, especially after heavy lifts. And that's not going to mean, if you're a woman, that's not going to mean, oh my gosh, I'm going to grow facial hair and look like a man. That just means those are going to support that muscle growth, that tissue repair, things of that nature. All right, so now we're going to get into endurance training. I recognize it's been like 13 minutes already. So now we're going to get into the health benefits of endurance training, then hybrid training, then we're going to get into the non-health benefits. So if you're sticking around for the non-health benefits, it won't be too much longer, don't worry. Endurance training, you're going to get cardiovascular and respiratory adaptations. So one of the first adaptations is cardiac efficiency. So endurance training is going to strengthen your heart and improve the stroke volume of your heart. The stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped per heartbeat. And so your heart gets stronger and your left ventricle gets a little bit bigger. And so every heartbeat pumps more blood. This is going to reduce the risk of high blood pressure or hypertension and heart disease. And it's also going to lower your resting heart rate. This is why your resting heart rate lowers as you do more endurance training. It's because your heart's more efficient. And so it has to beat less times per minute to pump the same amount of blood, nutrients, and oxygen throughout your body. And that's a huge thing. Resting heart rate, there's a very large normal range. I can't remember what it is, but it goes up to like 70 or 100 or something like that. My resting heart rate, since I've ran cross country in high school and have been an endurance athlete my whole life, normally hovers around the 50s. Sometimes it drops down to the 40s when I'm asleep. Fun fact, I was in the hospital one time, something unrelated, but they had me hooked up to the monitors and everything. And it was late at night and I couldn't fall asleep because every time I fell asleep, my heart rate dropped below 50 and the alarm would go off, because in an unhealthy person, heart rate that low is a bad sign in somebody who's not endurance trained. And the nurses actually had to come in and turn the alarm off eventually because I had to sleep, and they knew it was fine because I was a healthy endurance athlete. I was in season at the time. I think I was running 40 or 50 miles, maybe 60 miles per week at that time. Pretty high volume running. I wasn't doing a lot of strength training at the time. But, if you're worried, like, oh my gosh, there is a term, I can't remember what the medical term is for a low heart rate that low, and it's seen as a negative thing, and it is a negative thing if you're unhealthy. But if you're endurance trained, it's not bad. It means your heart's really efficient. You see some people like Tour de France cyclists who are also blood doping and doing all these other things, who have heart rates dangerously low, but that's because they're elite athletes who are also blood doping and doing steroids. Blood doping is where you take, I'm not super up on the science of it, but my very caveman understanding of blood doping is that you draw some blood from yourself and you do some science shit to it to increase the red blood cell count or increase the ability of the red blood cells to hold oxygen or something, and then you put it back in your body. So in that way, you're using your own blood, but your blood is able to better transport oxygen than at baseline than most people's is, and that's WADA banned. That's performance enhancing. Even though it's not necessarily a steroid, you are increasing the ability of your blood to transport oxygen. And so as such, your heart rate drops even lower. And there are stories of Tour de France cyclists having to get up in the middle of the night and do a sprint session so their heart rate doesn't go below like 20 beats per minute or something like that. But you don't have to worry about that for 99.999 repeated times 1,000% of people. So cardiovascular and endurance training is also going to increase or improve your VO2 max. So your VO2 max measures your body's capacity to use oxygen efficiently. This is your body's ability to transport oxygen to the cells, but also those cells' ability to use the oxygen. VO2 max is great for your health. It's something that people talk about all the time. However, it's not really a metric. I've talked about this in a podcast before. If you're trying to be as healthy as possible, increasing your VO2 max is a great goal, but the goal in itself shouldn't be the VO2 max number. The goal in itself should be the training required to get the VO2 max. Because having a super high VO2 max does not mean your health is not what makes you healthy. What makes you healthy is the training required to get that VO2 max, because there will be some genetic variation in the absolute upper limit of what your VO2 max can be. And a lot of people will get frustrated because they're training really hard and they're like, I can't get my VO2 max up like 1 more point or 2 more points. I'm not as healthy as I can be. When that's just not true, right? Maybe it is. Maybe you have more training to do. Maybe, you are missing out on some training, but realistically, the training to get the VO2 max is what makes you as healthy as possible. So endurance training is going to do that. And then endurance training is also going to improve blood flow and circulation. You're going to have more capillaries, which is your veins and arteries. In between them, there are these very small things known as capillaries. Sure, we learned about it in high school, right? So if you don't remember, maybe Google it. But that's where all the nutrients transport happens and the oxygen transport between the cells. So endurance training is going to improve capillarization, and that improved circulation supports nutrient delivery and waste removal, because our blood is not only delivering nutrients to our cells, but it's also removing waste from our cells from all the work that happens and things. So endurance training is going to improve capillarization, which is great. Muscularly and metabolically, endurance training is going to increase our mitochondrial density. If you remember from high school biology, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. It was a meme, it's still kind of a meme, but it was a real big meme 5 years ago. I don't know how to do my taxes, but I know mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. But by increasing the density of mitochondria, so the size and number of mitochondria in your body's going to be able to produce more ATP aerobically, and that's going to help your metabolic efficiency, which is going to help your overall health, because ATP is, as we discussed in a podcast, I think the last podcast, maybe 2 podcasts ago, ATP is how energy is transferred to be used by your body. Mitochondria is a big place that happens, the main place that happens. And so by increasing the density of your mitochondria, you're going to become more efficient, be able to recover faster from strength training, from intervals, things like that. And overall, you're just going to be healthier. You're not going to get winded walking up the stairs. Everybody probably knows the joke. The powerlifter that's super strong gets winded walking up the stairs. You're not going to get winded doing that. You're not going to get as winded playing with your kids if you have to chase your kid or grandkid who runs out in the street. My son is almost 18 months now. He's 17 months now. And what is today? Yeah, he's 17 months as of a few days ago. And the amount of times he just runs into whatever. He ran into the stove the other day. But if we were out front, he probably would try to run into the road. He doesn't know any better. So, and my dad trains, and he would be able to run after him. But if he didn't, grandkid runs in the road and you're not able to run after them, that's a shitty feeling, man. That's a shitty feeling. You got to be there for your grandkids and your kids and your family. You have to be able to show up. And that's a tangent that we'll get into in the podcast that we have another time. And then endurance training, the last thing on endurance training is insulin and glucose regulation. Endurance training also improves your body's ability to regulate glucose and insulin sensitivity. So any training, really, we talked about strength training doing that, really any training does that. So those are some health benefits of strength and endurance training. Hybrid training, how does this all come together? Hybrid training, ultimately, all of this helps you age well if you do both at the same time. You can probably see now as you start to put that together, both of these things are going to help you age well and be healthy. So all of this helps you age well, have less disease, keep a more favorable body composition as you age, be easier to keep that body composition as you age, and still be able to be active well into old age. You can play with your kids, grandkids, be self-sufficient longer, use the stairs, pick things up off the ground. One thing I actually love, there's a commercial that's gone around on social media. I think it was a commercial from Europe around Christmas. I'm not really sure. But it's gone around the last few years, and it's of a old guy who walks into his shed. It's snowy out. He walks into his shed and drags a kettlebell. He can barely pick it up. So he drags the kettlebell out to his garage or something. And then he tries to pick it up and he can't pick it up. And then it goes to this time lapse of him training to pick it up he reaches down and picks it up by the bells, right? So his hands are vertical. And then he starts to try to hold it out in front of him. And so it goes to this montage of him just getting stronger, and he can pick it up and hold it out in front of him for longer. And then he puts it down. He's exhausted. He's sweating. And he gets really, really strong in this position. And then it cuts to Christmas morning and the tree is up. And he reaches down and he grabs his granddaughter and he picks her up just like he picked up the kettlebell. And he holds her out. And she puts a star on the tree. And if you're watching, you might have seen me get a little emotional for a second. It's huge. I love that commercial because it really sums up why we do this, right? That's a huge moment. If especially since I've had a son now, like it just hits me differently. That's a huge moment being able to do that. And I can't imagine being in that position and wanting nothing more than to pick up my grandkid and put the star on the tree because she's asking me to, and have to look at my kids, the kids, my grandkids' parents, my kid and kid-in-law or whatever, and say, just give them that look of like, I can't do this. Can you do this? The unspoken, like, I can't. That would be fucking awful, like horrible. And I recognize I'm 20 years old. That's a ways down the road. And who am I to sit here and say, oh my God, like I'm just a young guy, right? But it really sums up why we do these things, right? Sport is fun. Sport is important. It's important to enjoy your life. I love competing. I love doing these events. But at the end of the day, when I'm hopefully 80 years old, still around, maybe, it's really about that, right? It's about those things. So hybrid training really is the best of both worlds, endurance and strength training. You can combine the two, get the health benefits, get the aging benefits, just to be a badass old person. And really, my note here is hybrid training is the path to being a badass 80-year-old. Because as I mentioned before, you can lift a ton, and that's probably most important. If I had to choose, I don't know. I can't say because the leading cause of death is heart disease, so endurance training is super important. But I just look at old people, and strength training would be so beneficial to them. So I really can't choose one or the other. That's why I say hybrid training is the best path, right? Because you get the strength benefits of being able to do all these things that we've talked about multiple times now. And you also get the health benefits from the endurance training, the ability to not be winded. It's really all synergistic. So I can't choose one or the other. That's why I'm so big on hybrid training for health, because it's so important to be able to do both. All right, so now we're going to get into the non-health benefits of hybrid training. And so really for me, if you're here, you might not know much about me. I'm not going to go super in detail, but I've trained in a hybrid style most of my life, even before it was known as hybrid training, before that term was coined. I never called it hybrid training. I was training to join the military and just do things that I enjoyed. But it's that freedom to do it all. When I was a runner, my coaches were always telling me that I should stop strength training because I'd be lighter and I'd be faster. I was running with a lot of people that were much smaller than me. My frame is not built to be a runner though, so no matter how much I stopped lifting, I would still be larger. But I didn't want to miss out on the strength training. I loved it. I loved both. And I didn't want to fall into this skinny runner, generalization, right? That's not what I wanted to be. I didn't want my whole life to be running. I really enjoyed running. I ran a lot. I mentioned 60 miles a week earlier. I've ran more than that at times. But I also loved lifting. I loved the pump. I loved being strong. I loved the way I looked. I loved being able to lift things and being that strong person. And I still do. And so it's that freedom to do it all, that freedom to say, no, I'm not going to fall into what you say is possible. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to forge my own path. I'm going to do my own thing. And I'm going to do what I want and have fun with it. And I'm going to jump into this event last minute. I'm going to go do an obstacle course race. Oh, I'm going to go run a half marathon. Like, I can do all this stuff. Am I elite? No. Even if I trained only running or only strength training, would I ever be elite? No, probably not. I'm not at this point, 26 years old, and I am not a genetic freak. But even before, right? Would I have been? Probably not. Statistically, probably not. So why stress about it, right? And another reason I like it and a lot of people like it is just experiencing the different communities, right? The strength and endurance communities and all the mixed ones like CrossFit, Spartans, other obstacle course races, High Rocks, all that. Those communities are full of amazing people and amazing experiences with such different personality types and different fields and experiences that I couldn't imagine being able to only choose one. When I did my powerlifting meet last year, I love that community. It was awesome, right? That community, the metal music playing, the heavy lifting, the pre-workout, the just kind of very intense environment of all. I love that. Super fun, super awesome. But also the trail running community, the powerlifting community was also very welcoming. It was just a very different feel if you've ever been there. The trail running community, very welcoming, very kind of laid back, relaxed. People are eating candy while they hike and run. And I couldn't imagine not getting to experience that either, right? My whole life, I couldn't imagine going my whole life and not experiencing both of them. I really love the contrast. I think it helps you enjoy those communities and those friendships and those relationships more because you get the contrast of not the sounding board of this is the whole world. Powerlifting is the whole world and nobody else is like this and fuck anybody else that doesn't do this. Like, this is the way. I don't prescribe to that. I don't subscribe to that, whatever the term is. And I can't imagine doing that. I love the contrast in life in general, but in those relationships and those friends. I've got a friend that I can go lift with, and he's intense and he can deadlift 700 pounds and lifting his whole life. And that's awesome. He loves it. I love being around that energy. I love lifting, but I can also go out on the weekend for a a nice chill morning run on the trail with my other friend who's also intense about trail running and loves it, but the vibe is off, or not off, but different. The vibe is not off. The vibe is very on, but the vibe is different. And that's something that I couldn't not do. I love that. And another thing about the different experiences, I love learning to push myself in different ways. The things I learned about myself pushing for a powerlifting meet are equally powerful for me, but very different than the things I learned pushing for like a long trail race or even a fast mile, right? I think you go to different parts of your brain, you struggle with the same concerns. Can I do this? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? But the mental space you're in, especially like a heavy back squat or going up on the platform for heavy deadlifts in a powerlifting meet or just in general, is very different than the headspace you're in when it's like, can I push a little harder for 3 more laps on the track, for 2 more laps on the track? Okay, this is the last lap. Like, can I dig deep? What do I have? Or can I make it another 10 miles? Right. Those are very different mental places to be in. I think they build skills that are so important for life, but I think they're very different skills because there's something to be said for that all out, like this back squat might crush me. There's spotters here, so they won't. But this back squat might crush me. I need to lock in for, 15 seconds while I get under the bar, squat, and then re-rack it. That intensity, that is awesome. It's a super high to experience. But then the kind of slow burn, dig deep intensity of an 800 meter all out, a mile all out, a mile and a half all out, that's really hard. Going out and trying to pace yourself and say, all right, how can I make sure I'm completely spent at the end of this 4 laps at the end of this mile? I'll use the mile for an example because a mile is a nice fun time trial, or if you're in the UK, 1,500 meters is kind of the go-to race, I think, or 1,600 meters, right? A mile is 1,609 meters. But anyways, for the 1,600 meter, right, 4 laps. Pacing yourself to go all out for 4 laps is really hard. And in that third lap is the hardest lap because you don't have kind of the excitement of it being the last lap. And like, how do you dig deep and push faster for that 4 laps? That's really hard. And then you get into long endurance races, half marathons, ultras, on the road or on the trail. How do you show up for that, especially when you're doing a really long race like a marathon or an ultra marathon? Some of these races you're doing 3, 4, 5, 10, 24 hours, plus 24 hours sometimes. Those are very different. And you learn so much about yourself in the preparation for all of those, especially when you're kind of doing them at the same time. And I don't know, it's just completely wild experience to be able to experience all of those. And I, again, can't imagine doing life without them. And a lot of people I talk to feel the same way. So, and another thing about hybrid training is just general physical preparation, GPP phase. This idea that you can be ready for anything. So you kind of have different models of training. One model of training is a GPP and SPP, so general physical preparation and specific physical preparation. So depending on the athlete, one way I like to do things for some athletes is do this GPP, SPP setup. So in the GPP phase, which is most of the year, you're doing general physical preparation, you're doing strength work, endurance work, maybe cycling and swimming as well, depending on what sport they actually want to do. And you're kind of generally keeping them prepared for anything. And what I like about this is if you aren't sure what your goals are, which sometimes in my life I'm not sure what my goals are, you can just train to be as generally physically prepared as possible and be as badass as possible. And then you can pivot into a specific physical preparation phase whenever you want. And so for me, when I did my powerlifting meet, I actually didn't decide I wanted to do it until about 6 weeks out. And a lot of powerlifting peak preps are longer than that, 12 weeks-ish, plus, minus a little bit, depending on the prep. And I really was just training to be as generally physically prepared as possible. I was doing a lot of endurance work, a lot of strength work, and then I said, I want to do this. And I kind of pivoted into this 6-week specific preparation for the powerlifting meet, and I did well. I didn't do amazing. I wouldn't have done amazing even if I did a 12-week prep, just because I'm not only a powerlifter, but I had a lot of fun. I PR'd everything, which is all you can do. Compare yourself to yourself, not compare yourself to other people. And I had a lot of fun, and it gives you that freedom and flexibility to say, oh yeah, I want to do this. Okay, yeah, I want to pivot into this. Oh yeah, let's pivot into this. Oh, actually, you know what? I decided I don't want to do that. Let's take a step back. And you can really set your training up so you're generally prepared for anything, and you can jump into any activity last minute. Friend wants you to do a Spartan race? Hell yeah, I'll do a Spartan race. Friend wants you to jump into a 10K half marathon? Sure, I'll fucking do that. That's awesome. And it gives you this ability to be very fluid with what you're doing. That way you get as much enjoyment out of life as possible. All right, so in summary, we've gone over hybrid training from a health perspective, from a non-health perspective. Certainly there's other reasons. I'd be curious to hear what reasons, health-wise or non-health-wise, you're interested in hybrid training. So if you want to drop a comment, I don't know if you can comment on podcasts. So send me an email, DM me on Instagram. My links are all in the description. In summary, if you aren't drawn to squeezing every last optimization out of a single sport, and instead you want to perform as well as possible in all the different domains, age like a badass, be prepared for anything life throws at you, hybrid training really is the way to go. Training strength and endurance is the way to go. You just have to be careful about how you program them together. And I have a lot of other resources on that, free resources. I have a free guide. I have other podcasts. I have YouTube videos. I have a whole YouTube series actually on this. And so if you're interested in hybrid training, if you feel like this is really what you want to do, you can always DM me and we can hop on a call. If you don't want to do that, you can always download my free guide, go to my old podcast, go to my YouTube channel. That's all linked below. And you can really dive into the programming aspects of hybrid training if you're convinced. If you're not convinced, I'm curious, send me a DM, send me an email. I'd love to talk more. If you're kind of interested but still not completely sold on hybrid training, I'd love to talk to you more about it. And I'm not going to bullshit you, right? If you're like, hey, I really want to do a powerlifting or a bodybuilding show, I really hate endurance work, I'm not going to tell you hybrid training is what you should do if you don't want to do it. But I think it's for more people than maybe a lot of people think. And so I'd love to hear about your specific circumstances and talk to you about what you should be doing. So, and additionally, something I haven't mentioned yet, if you're a tactical athlete and you need to train for your on-the-job requirements, or you're training for an academy or selection course, hybrid training is going to be the best way for you to prepare. There's going to be some additional things since we're not training for a specific race or event, but we're training for your on-the-job or your selection needs. Things are going to be a little different. Actually, I have a good amount of tactical athletes on my roster right now. I think I have 4 people training for SFAS right now. If you're in the tactical world, you know what that is. And I have some people at various academies, fire academies, preparing for police academy, some military academies. So I have a good amount of tactical athletes. It's how I got started in this space if you don't know much about me. And hybrid training really is the way to do that. Again, it's just going to look a little different since we're training for a job or for a selection course versus for a race, but it's not super different. There are just some added things that we need to make sure you're ready for because of the unpredictability and adaptability of tactical training and tactical environments. So if you got value from this podcast, definitely leave a rating and review. It helps the podcast, helps me get more of this out to people like you who get value from it. 5 stars, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe wherever you are, do all the things. It helps me a lot. And if you didn't like the podcast, let me know what you didn't like, what you want to see more of. Always trying to put content out that helps you guys. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast.